Welcome to a story that begins with nothing more than a smile across a fence, innocent, harmless, almost forgettable. But sometimes the smallest sparks become the wildest flames. What starts with casual glances soon becomes a pull too strong to ignore. One night, the line between right and wrong vanishes with a single kiss that sets everything on fire. From there, every stolen night becomes a universe of its own, breaths uneven, bodies tangled, whispers that turn darkness into something sacred. And though judgment, age, and rules press in from every side, love grows deeper, bolder, until the truth can no longer be denied. This isn't just passion. It's dangerous, forbidden, and yet the purest love ever known. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will shake your soul. It started in the most ordinary way, as if the universe had disguised something extraordinary in the simple folds of daily life. A fence divided two homes, but it became the stage for the kind of glances that carried more weight than words ever could. At first, it was nothing, a nod when the sun was dipping low, a smile exchanged while watering plants, a few light-hearted comments tossed over the wooden planks. But there was something unspoken under those moments, a quiet pull that lingered long after the voices had gone silent. There was no plan, no search, no deliberate chasing of something forbidden. It crept in softly without warning. One evening bled into another, and suddenly the conversations grew longer. They shifted from small talk about the weather to deeper questions, stories that peeled back the layers of guarded lives. Each answer carried a kind of intimacy that felt dangerous, not because of the words themselves, but because of how intently they were heard. There was a way his eyes locked, as though nothing else in the world mattered in those seconds, and in that gaze, something stirred that had been dormant for far too long. It was impossible not to notice how easily laughter came. The kind that didn't feel forced, that rolled out naturally, leaving a warmth in its wake. Those laughs filled spaces that had been silent for years. Even the air felt different when he was near, charged, alive, heavy with a strange anticipation. There was no denying it, though every instinct whispered that it shouldn't be acknowledged. Still, every encounter left behind a trace, like fingerprints pressed into the heart, impossible to wipe clean. There was a night when the world seemed to stand still. The sky was painted with fading streaks of orange, and the quiet hum of crickets filled the air. He leaned against the fence, arms crossed casually, as though the weight of everything unsaid wasn't burning just beneath the surface. The conversation wandered, as it often did, until suddenly it didn't feel like talk at all. It felt like confession. Words tumbled out, not about trivial things, but about dreams, disappointments, longings that had no safe place to land. And in the silence after those confessions, the spark revealed itself fully raw, alive, undeniable. It was the way his voice softened when he listened, the way his eyes lingered longer than they should have, the way silence between them didn't feel awkward but electric. That silence carried more heat than entire conversations with others. Each pause was heavy, like standing at the edge of something vast, knowing one step would change everything. What made it so impossible to resist wasn't only the attraction, though that was strong and undeniable. It was the way being seen felt brand new. For years, life had moved like a shadow, invisible, unnoticed background noise in a world that had forgotten how to listen. But then there he was, and suddenly every word spoken, every smile exchanged, every glance across that old wooden fence felt like proof that existence mattered. It was dangerous, intoxicating proof, and once tasted, it couldn't be forgotten. Every evening began to feel like waiting for something more. The sound of his footsteps outside carried through the walls. The flicker of movement on his side of the fence brought a rush of energy that was impossible to explain. The garden became more than a place for routine. It became the setting of secret anticipation, a stage where two lives played out a slow, delicate dance towards something neither dared name aloud. And yet, underneath the sweetness was always the quiet awareness of the risk. The mind whispered warnings, tried to pull back, tried to dismiss it as fleeting curiosity, but the body betrayed those thoughts, leaning in just a little closer during conversation, smiling a little wider, holding eye contact just a little longer than necessary. The truth was, the more resistance there was, the stronger the pull became. It wasn't just attraction, it was hunger, not only of the flesh but of the soul. There were nights lying awake, replaying moments in vivid detail. The way the air shifted when he was near, the way his laughter echoed in memory, stirring a longing that refused to fade, the way one accidental brush of his hand against mine left a heat that burned long after he was gone. These weren't just harmless exchanges anymore. They had already become something dangerous, something alive, something that crossed the line even before a line had been consciously drawn. Each glance felt like a secret, each word like a thread pulling two people closer together. There was no dramatic declaration, no bold move at the beginning, only the quiet, steady rhythm of connection building, growing, tightening its grip. The fence, once a barrier, became something else entirely, a symbol of everything that kept it hidden, but also of the thrill of knowing what lingered on the other side. And deep down, it was already understood. It was only a matter of time before the pull became too strong to resist. It happened so suddenly that even now the memory feels like fire branded into the skin, something that can never be erased. For so long the pull had been there, hiding in glances, in conversations that lasted longer than they should, in silences that spoke louder than words. And then one night, the space that had kept everything contained dissolved, as though the world itself leaned in and forced the truth into the open. The air was heavy that evening, carrying the scent of rain that had just passed, leaving the ground damp and the sky washed clean. The glow of the streetlight spilled softly across the fence, painting everything in shadows and gold. He was close, closer than usual, his arm brushing lightly against mine as we leaned in over the wooden planks, talking about nothing and everything all at once. It should have been ordinary, like so many nights before, but something about the way the night wrapped around us made it feel different. The first spark came not from words, but from a touch so small it could have been ignored. His hand brushed mine, accidental, fleeting, but the jolt that followed was anything but. Heat raced through my veins, my breath caught, and in that moment the unspoken became undeniable. The world blurred into silence, and all that existed was the place where skin had met skin. He didn't pull away. I didn't either. The smallest hesitation hung between us, a question that begged to be answered. And then it happened. His lips touched mine, tentative at first, almost trembling, like he knew it was wrong, but couldn't stop himself. The kiss was gentle, questioning, but in that gentleness lived something far more dangerous: desire, raw and consuming, breaking free after being caged for too long. The second his mouth lingered, restraint shattered, I felt myself surrendering to it, not with thought, not with reason, but with every fiber of a body that had been waiting for this fire. It deepened quickly, almost desperately, as though years of silence had poured into that one stolen moment. My hands moved on their own, finding his face, pulling him closer, while his arms wrapped around me with a hunger that left no room for doubt. The kiss was no longer a question. It was an answer, one that could not be taken back. Every warning, every fear, every reason to stop fell away in that storm of passion, leaving only the truth of what was felt. Time seemed to vanish. The night air was cool, but my skin burned. His breath against me was fire, his touch both tender and wild, as though he too was caught between reverence and need. The innocence of what we had shared before was gone, replaced by something uncontainable. Every heartbeat was louder than thought, drowning out the voice of reason. It didn't matter anymore that it was forbidden. It didn't matter that the world would call it wrong. What mattered was that for the first time I felt alive, consumed, wanted in a way that shook me to the core. When he pulled back just barely, our foreheads pressed together, I could feel his hesitation, his breath uneven, his body trembling with restraint. But his eyes betrayed him. They burned, just as mine did, with a fire that neither of us could extinguish now that it had been lit. He whispered something, words I can't even remember now, because it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the way his voice cracked with need, with fear, with the overwhelming truth that what had just happened had changed everything. We didn't speak of it after that moment. The night carried on in silence, but it wasn't the kind of silence we'd known before. This one was thick, alive, filled with the echo of what had just been unleashed. My lips still burned, my skin still tingled, and every breath I took carried his taste. There was no undoing it, no pretending it hadn't happened. The line had been crossed, and the weight of that crossing pressed down on us both. Lying awake later, I replayed every detail: the softness of his mouth, the heat of his hands, the way desire had poured through me like a flood, unstoppable and wild. Shame fought with longing, guilt with hunger. And yet beneath the chaos was one undeniable truth. I didn't regret it, not even for a second. The danger of it only made it more intoxicating, as if love had chosen the most forbidden path to prove its power. What scared me most wasn't the kiss itself, but the realization that it was only the beginning. That one touch had opened a door that could never be closed again. The taste of him lingered too strongly, the memory of his arms around me too vivid. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, every part of me ached for more. That night marked the end of pretending. Whatever came after, the truth had already been written on our lips. The distance between us had vanished, and in its place burned a secret so fierce, so consuming, it could no longer be denied. The first night it happened, I knew the world as I had known it was gone. What had begun as a secret spark, what had started with a stolen kiss, unfolded into something so consuming that the body and soul became indistinguishable. Each night after that was no longer just an escape, no longer just an indulgence of desire. It became a world that belonged only to us, where the rest of life ceased to exist. The quiet hours after midnight became sacred. The darkness that should have hidden us instead wrapped around us like a cocoon, protecting the truth we dared not show in daylight. Every step taken toward him felt like crossing a threshold into a place forbidden, yet so necessary, a place where I was stripped of every mask, every defense, until there was nothing left but raw honesty. And in that honesty, we found each other with a depth I never imagined possible. Those nights were fire and tenderness woven together. His hands, rough with youth yet trembling with reverence, traced every inch of me like he was learning a language only we could speak. Each touch was more than physical. It carried weight, devotion, a promise that even if the world condemned us, we would not let go. My body responded with a hunger that was deeper than flesh, a hunger that had been buried for years beneath silence and loneliness. He awakened it with a touch, a whisper, a kiss that lingered until the line between love and desire disappeared. We didn't rush. Even in our urgency, there was a kind of patience, as if we both knew these moments mattered too much to waste. Breath mingled with breath, heartbeats quickened and then slowed, as though time itself was bending to let us savor each second. When our bodies finally gave in to the storm, it wasn't reckless. It was deliberate, slow enough to feel every shiver, every gasp, every desperate pull closer. It wasn't only about pleasure. It was about being seen, being known, being wanted in a way so complete it felt almost holy. Each night after, the connection grew deeper. The darkness taught us how to speak without words. A brush of lips at my neck told me he needed me. The grip of my hand at his back told him I wouldn't let go. The rhythm of our bodies became a conversation, one where every movement said what we could never say aloud in daylight, that this was love disguised as hunger, devotion hidden inside desire. But it wasn't only the physical that changed everything. It was the way he held me afterward, as if I wasn't something he had conquered, but something he had found. His arms were strong but never possessive. They were shelter. In those quiet moments, lying against his chest, I heard more truth than I had ever heard in a lifetime of spoken promises. His heartbeat against my ear told me I mattered. His steady breathing lulled me into a peace I hadn't known for decades. In the safety of his arms, I wasn't older, I wasn't broken, I wasn't invisible. I was whole, alive, desired, loved. The whispers in the dark carried secrets too dangerous to ever leave that room. Words of longing, of confession, of dreams we had no right to share. They spilled out between gasps and sighs, between kisses pressed against skin, still trembling with aftershocks. He told me things he had never told anyone, and I did the same, because in those hours, trust was absolute. The world outside might never understand, but in those nights, we created a universe that belonged only to us. Sometimes guilt tried to creep in, but it never lasted. Not when his hands were tangled in mine, not when his eyes searched me, as though I was the only thing that existed. Guilt dissolved in the heat of his breath, in the way his body curved into mine, as though it had been made to fit. Whatever rules had been broken, whatever boundaries had been crossed, none of it felt wrong when we were together. If love is meant to heal, to awaken, to set fire to the places gone cold, then what we shared was the purest form of it, no matter what the world would call it. The danger of it all only made the nights more consuming. Every creak of the floor, every shift of shadows outside the window carried risk, but that risk made every moment feel stolen, precious, irreplaceable. We knew we were playing with fire, but it was fire that kept us alive, and once tasted, we couldn't go back to the ashes of silence. Over time, those nights changed me completely. They stripped away fear, stripped away shame, stripped away the idea that passion and tenderness were things that belonged only to the young. With him, I discovered that desire doesn't fade with age, that love doesn't weaken with time, it only waits for the right hands, the right heart, the right moment to bring it back to life. And when it comes, it doesn't whisper. It roars. Each stolen night became a world where nothing else mattered, a world where hunger and tenderness were the same thing, where lust was only another name for love written in the language of the body. And in that world, I found not just him, but myself again. Those nights didn't just change us, they changed everything. The deeper it grew, the harder it became to hold on to the illusion that it was wrong. At first, there was guilt, sharp and heavy, a weight that pressed down after every stolen moment, whispering reminders of what lines had been crossed. But guilt is fragile when it stands against something so consuming, something that seeps into every corner of life until pretending feels impossible. What had begun as fire hidden in the dark became a flame that refused to stay contained. It followed into mornings, into quiet hours, into the smallest details of every day. It was in the way his name echoed inside even when he was not near, in the way the memory of his touch lingered long after he had gone. It was in the way the body responded instinctively at the sound of his footsteps, the way the heart leapt with a rush that no denial could silence. Judgment existed, yes, the world's harsh gaze waiting just beyond the walls, but within the closeness we shared, that judgment dissolved. Age blurred into nothing, boundaries collapsed like walls too weak to withstand the force of what had taken root between us. There were moments when I tried to reason with myself, to remind myself of the rules, of the dangers. I would stand in the mirror, whispering warnings no one else could hear, convincing myself that I could step away if I truly wanted to. But then his arms would be around me again, his voice breaking the silence, his eyes carrying a kind of devotion that stripped away all fear, and I knew the truth I didn't want to leave. The danger of it only made the love feel more alive, as if the risk itself was proof of its depth. We became reckless in the way lovers do when the heart overpowers reason. Every meeting carried the sweetness of urgency. The desperation of knowing it could all collapse with one wrong step, yet refusing to let that fear keep us apart. In the dark, when our bodies pressed together and our breaths tangled, the world outside ceased to exist. It wasn't only passion, though passion was everywhere. It was the softness in the way he touched me afterward, the way he whispered words not of lust but of love, words that seeped into the deepest parts of me and healed wounds I had long stopped believing could heal. The truth of what we shared frightened me because it didn't feel temporary. This wasn't a passing indulgence, not a fleeting escape from loneliness. It grew with each day, rooting itself deeper, demanding to be acknowledged. The more I tried to tell myself it couldn't last, the more undeniable it became that it wasn't something I could walk away from. Love had wrapped itself around me completely, and there was no pulling free without tearing myself apart. There were times when I caught glimpses of how others would see it, the difference in age, the whispers that would follow, the cruel names and judgments ready to fall. But when he looked at me, none of that mattered. His gaze erased the years, erased the lines, erased the shame. In his arms, I was not defined by the past, not confined by expectation. I was simply myself, seen in a way I had never been seen before, loved with a purity that was both terrifying and irresistible. What made it dangerous wasn't just the secrecy or the fear of discovery. It was the way it reshaped everything. Once tasted, nothing else compared. Ordinary life felt pale beside it, conversations with others empty, touches from anyone else meaningless. Love like this devours, it claims every part of existence until it is no longer a choice but a necessity. And though I knew the risk, though I knew the cost, I also knew I would choose it again and again, because anything less would feel like dying. Every kiss, every night together, every whispered promise was proof of a truth that could not be denied. What we shared was not wrong, no matter how many would call it so. It was dangerous, yes, because it defied the rules of the world, because it dared to exist where it was not supposed to. But within that danger was the purity of something so rare it could not be explained, the kind of love that burns not to destroy, but to transform. And so I stopped pretending, stopped whispering warnings in the mirror, stopped trying to convince myself that it was only a momentary fire. The truth was too clear, too relentless. What we had was forbidden, but it was also the most honest, the most profound, the most beautiful love I had ever known. What happened between us was dangerous, but it was also the only truth that ever felt real. If this story touched you, if it stirred something deep inside, don't leave without joining this journey. Like, subscribe, and share, because here, love is told in its rawest, most unforgettable truth.